In his book, Richard Osmer, Practical Theology, discusses a theory that was developed by Richard Niebuhr, titled or called The Responsibility of Self. In that theory, he intends to develop a Christian moral philosophy by developing two questions that become important in our discussion, particularly in reflecting on Mark chapter 1, verse 14 to verse 15. And the two questions are this. The first one is, what shall I do? The second one is, what is going on? And he argues, and I agree with this argument, he argues that the best way to answer the first question is to answer the second question. So in other words, he's saying the best way to reflect on what you ought to be doing is to understand what you believe is going on. So let us start with the second question. The second question, which we make our first, is really a question of what, when a person is observing the happenings around them, what do they conclude to what is happening? So, in other words, it is really to take the question as simple as what is going on, to expound the question and to contextualize the question. It doesn't just end with what is going on. It goes further to develop other questions within that question. And that is to say, what is going on where? Or maybe what is going on with what? And one would even say, okay, what is going on in relation to what? When? What is going on is a very important question. So what is happening or what is going on is really a question of discernment. It's a question of trying to evaluate, to look at things as they happen, and to draw some kind of conclusion that will help you answer the second question of what shall I do? But we know when you talk about discernment, discernment is a very important virtue. Because when you talk about discernment, it means it is the ability to weigh the evidence before reaching a conclusion. One man also views discernment as the activity of seeking God's guidance in the midst of circumstances, events, and also with a personal decisions one has to make. The discernment really, in attempting to evaluate what is happening around, does not in itself really give us the answers that are necessarily factual. Because what that means is that we only work with the evidence we have. And one of the gifts we do not have naturally as individuals, is the ability to research. So unfortunately, many a times what we do is that we draw to quick conclusions. We draw to very quick solutions over matters that we really know very little about. Because I think we miss humility in our discernment. Let me give us an example. Religion or religious people in our recent time, some of you might know this, prophets of our time and religious people were constantly stating that God has been speaking to them about Donald Trump being elected for the second time, for the second term. And it was all over YouTube, prophets declaring that God said to them that Trump is going to win the election. Some of you might know it. And that was on the ground that Trump is supporting other churches, supporting Christian activities. And there were other reasons to that. But I think the issue is not how wrong a person can be. But I think the issue is the attitude in the process of being wrong. Because all of us will be wrong. But I think when we lack the humility in our conversation about God, when we get to a point where we own the divinity, where we have colonized God to make God super Christian, to make God respond to what our desires are, we speak with certainty. We have tendencies to speak and to act way ahead of God, way outside of God, still holding on to the very scriptures. And that's not only example. Religious people in the time of Jesus and their appointed priests and pastors of their time killed Jesus of Nazareth, the whole Jesus, an entire Messiah. And they crucified him because they declared him one who was blaspheming against God Almighty. They killed him like a criminal. Religious people and their prophets did that. Because, again, they colonized the tabernacle. They colonized Yahweh. And they wanted whatever is going to operate according to how they want it. Moving from being made in the image of God and that image of God to be restored in us, to running ahead and making God in our own image and making him in our own desires. We have to be very careful. We have to be careful in the times that we are living in. And when we answer or when we ask the question, what is going on around us? And we are trying to discern what is going on. Humility becomes of importance. It is Bonhoeffer who said the first move of discernment is simply the admission that in reality we don't know. And one man also adds to that to say, we have to understand that what we think we know, as a matter of fact, he said, what we know is like a drop in the ocean. We refuse to always speak for God in matters that closes out conversations. I think Paul also warned us about these tendencies. He says, be careful then how you live in Ephesians chapter 5 verse 15. Not as unwise, but as wise. You know, the word that is used to careful, the word that is used there in the King James for be careful, is the Greek word akribos, and it means circumspectly. And that means to be cautious. It means to apply wisdom, to act in prudence. It means to look around. Very important. It means to look around. It means to apply a careful consideration of all circumstances with the desire of nurturing a desire to avoid mistakes. Now we know that we can't always avoid mistakes, but there are other times where we have the option to articulate, to act, to respond with avoiding mistakes. And so when we ask the question, what is going on? We are trying to discern emotionally, financially, psychologically, and spiritually of what is surrounding us, just personally, but also outside of ourselves in our community, to ask the question, what is going on? And when we ask the question, what is going on, we are putting that question on the table for discussion, not to quickly dive to verses that are isolated from each other. One person is quoting this verse, Revelation is saying this, the other one is quoting from Daniel. There's too much. We need to learn to ask this question and say, God, may we journey with you in understanding how to respond to what is going on. Not just what is going on, but to extend that question further and ask, what are you doing? Is there something perhaps that we should be aware of in the events of the happenings? It's important to uphold humility, so that when you have discussions, when you make statements that open up different views and points of reflections. Perhaps maybe to bring the question even closer, to say, let us narrow it down, not just to the problems of our country, not just to the problems of our church and Christianity as we have it, the crisis of faith, not just that, but to bring it back and say it develops other questions, such as, what is really troubling you? What is concerning you? Why are you so unhappy? What do you want in order to be happy? What do you think you need in order to be happy? Where is your peace? And having answered those questions that are grounded on that one question, what is going on or what is happening, we can then explore the second question. What shall I do? What shall I do?